it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, everyone. So, Sam, my reaction to this week can be summarised thusly. Was that it? Yes, after much build-up and bluster as the international break came to an end, FPL came back. But much like reactions to my sexual prowess in the past, many managers left disappointed by the week's events and couldn't wait for it to end. Ah, dear. Let's dig into that a bit today. Plus a few other bits and pieces in what's always historically a bit of a low week, I think, after the international break. I feel like kind of the past few seasons, it's always been game week 4 or game week 5, whenever the international break has just been and gone. We definitely do see a bit of negative variance impacting the template, at least, which again is going to crop up in just a minute. Great to be joined as usual by Sam. Commiserations too, mate. I know you were feeling a great result for your team was on the cusp versus United, but that missed penalty seems to change everything, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a good thing Armstrong's on penalties, isn't it? Jesus, that was poor. Yeah, the game really swung after that penalty miss. I was sat in walkabout, and as soon as that was saved, I knew it was all going to go downhill from there. But I had a good weekend regardless. I'm pretty used to watching my team lose, so that is not going to affect me too much these days. Yeah, and in good spirits as we move towards what is quite likely to be wildcard next week for both of us, I think. So very excited about FPL at the moment. And of course, as always, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we've started to notice between both of us that things are starting to look possibly a little bit more template in the last couple of weeks. Things, of course, won't hold for long as a lot of wildcards get pressed in the next couple of game weeks. But there is a strategy that seems to be forming as well, of course, with the wildcard being centered around for the next 2 or 3 weeks. A good time to discuss how the template, how the game state rather, changes throughout the campaign and how we can adapt. Pick out some evergreen advice as well as things specific to this season where we can possibly try and allocate some different tactics specifically to this year. And of course, as always, we'll have the price point, anything we noticed from this week's games, Game Week 5 preview, including the knee jerk, again, touching on wildcards a little bit, and of course, moves made in our own situations. Have either of us already made transfers? I'm not sure whether one of us might have or not. And of course, we'll talk about best transfers, bold claims. One of us actually did manage to get on the board this week, which is always good to see. And of course, we'll wrap up with captaincy and our teams as it stands. It is Monday, the 16th of September. There's no Monday night football, but there's a lot of cup action and of course, the continental football in the midweek. So it is important to timestamp just to make sure that there are no midweek injuries and it immediately dates our pod and you think that it's all relevant up until the Friday. Monday, that's the information we've got. For now, though, shall we have a look at the game week reviews, Tom?
Yeah, let's do that. So it wasn't really a standard bearing game week as I've just kind of hinted. 53 for me. Lots was kind of riding on a few individuals this week. And hence what Sam mentioned earlier on about what we're going to talk about today. Those players were basically Munoz and potentially in a few leagues, likes of Isak, Rogers, and Conser, I think was the other kind of low-owned player, and yeah, consequently Munoz got one. Did have a couple of did get into a couple of good positions, but as seems to be the story with him, didn't seem to have much conviction in doing anything when he got in those positions and received the ball. Conser, we conceded very early, and that was kind of that. And Isak obviously went off with blurred vision, we're told. Could be a symptom of concussion, but probably just a poke to the eye, really, more than anything else. But yeah, a bit of a rubbish week overall. Jota going off at 59, 57 is going to be great fare for FPL General and his pod. And Mo Salah came in for Saka, and Irogbenam came in for Gordon. So down on that transfer, but I think I was always going to make it, so I'm not really too upset about that. Haaland carried the week, really, and it's only him and Smith Rowe with the assist and the bonus point after Fulham conceded with the last kick of the game, which I really liked, and I'm sure you didn't. And then David Raya, who I again can only thank you, Sam, for talking me into that one, because it has been quite a phenomenal kind of few weeks owning David Raya, and I suspect that I can't see any reason why he wouldn't stay in my team for the next few weeks, barring injury. Basically, it may even be that he stays there for the whole time until we get into silly season of chips and things like that. So yeah, down to kind of 320k or something like that. But a pretty poor week overall for most people meant that the damage wasn't too severe, and a few little bits and pieces, like I said, that Fulham concession, meaning that things weren't worse in terms of how it all kind of netted out. Didn't have João Pedro as well, so Porro came off the bench. So other thing to note. What about you?
Yeah, so slightly better than you, but basically by the by, 3 points in it, so 56 for me. Raya, obviously very happy with that, 3 clean sheets in 4, and I will be hanging on to that one good piece of advice all season long. You better believe it anyway. 3 returners in the side, so Smith Rowe, Raya, and Haaland were the only 3 that got anything, but that was enough for about 100k green arrow. So again, tight margins, not much in it at all. It's fine. It's not a game week that we'll long remember. I don't think, certainly not for the right reasons. Most of the players that scored big were low owned outside of Haaland. So the damage, like you said, in most cases, as long as you had Haaland and captained him, was pretty minimal. So obviously we have seen some disasters with those who didn't have Haaland this game week or didn't captain him. But it will balance out over time. I wouldn't worry too much. 9 goals in 4 games, whilst it is incredible, he's not going to score 70 goals this season. So I think we can assume that at times it will balance out a little bit. It is a bit crazy at the moment, though. And yeah, I made 2 transfers. Salah and Eze came in for 2 returners of Bruno and Saka. I honestly don't regret it even for a second. I knew that the 2 leaving my side could punish me. And actually, after those 2 had blanked, I was a bit surprised that they didn't punish me slightly more. Obviously, Bruno just got the assist. Saka got an assist and I think a bonus point, maybe 2. Oh, no, bonus point and a clean sheet point anyway. And I really wanted to make those moves mainly to make sure I had Salah as the prime captaincy candidate for game week 5. So whether or not those moves pay off is something I need to analyze at the end of next game week rather than right now. For now, I'm down, but I have a sneaky suspicion it could level itself back out next week. So not panicking there. My differentials, Minte, very, very frustrating there. Had a couple of little flashes and a couple of little moments, but nothing spectacular. He has been a bit disappointing, and I wouldn't be looking at him long term at this point now. His minutes are getting a little bit managed as well. Not happy with that. Rodgers has just been all fart at the moment, as the saying goes. And Isak, I'm pretty confident he'll be fine for game week 5, but maybe there is something in it and it's a bit more of an issue. And we obviously need to monitor that as well. As you mentioned, Robinson getting the clean sheet wipeout last minute was very frustrating, but gave me an extra point for Smith Rowe, so it's not the end of the day.
Yeah, it's just kind of a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, that one. But I mean, I was pretty happy to see Danny Ings score. I'm not going to lie, just because I think that was kind of one of the very, very small moments, I think, where like if I think if Fulham had kept that clean sheet, then my rank would have been a lot worse. Just because I think Robinson was fairly highly, and at least in the kind of engaged areas that I currently seem to be in. Hey, there you go, 100k green arrow. Good news, Sam. Always nice. Always nice to grab that after post IB. But yeah, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that you didn't need that much this week to prevail. Cool. Just a quick mention before we move on to the main topic about the international break with João Pedro. We mentioned it a little bit on the last pod. And I think I tweeted on I think it was on Saturday that it was I speak about availability heuristic on the pod a little bit every now and again. That's the tendency to base your opinions on one item of easy remembered information at the expense of wider context. And I think that I'm going to be sick to the back teeth of this whenever I kind of see it cited on FPL Twitter over the next kind of few months and indeed next few seasons. Oh, remember that time you were in João Pedro and you came back injured from international break? That just kind of completely ignores the fact that so many players came back from international break after really long travels and were absolutely fine. The vast majority of them started. So I don't think anyone can base the next time we look at international break and think about travel and things like that on João Pedro effectively. We'll do a deep dive into post IB game week expectations prior to coming back to FPL after next IB, which I think is pre game week 8.
Yeah, I
A
think
bit
so.
frustrated we didn't think of it last week, actually. But I mean, this is one of those where you have to look into. But yeah, I mean, you said it yourself, didn't you? We were texting about it, but so many players who travelled even further distances played. So it's not really anything to really worry about or kind of make a big deal of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a symptom of the long travel or the international break per se. It's just a symptom of the fact that players play football matches all the time and get injured at random intervals. And unfortunately, we had a manager that wasn't willing to disclose that information pre-deadline in Hertzler. So we maybe make a little note of that, and that maybe he's going to be a little bit deceitful, a la Eddie Howe at times this season. Just one to keep an eye on. But yeah, you know, this can happen to any player. I would never let it put me off of transfers, as long as you deal with the information at the end of the international break, because in this case he chose not to tell us, but in other cases managers might let us know, or it's obvious from on the pitch incidents like with Erdegaard, you know that they're injured and therefore you know not to buy them or to sell them. With João Pedro, there was no way of knowing either way. It was, in inverted commas, safe to make the move because there was nothing from the pre-match press conference. He got through the international break without anything that we were to know of. And it's just one of those that the managers are willing to lie about these things to give themselves a bit of a leg up ahead of the oncoming game week. So it's nothing to do with the international break. It's more to do with the manager and their ability to be deceiving here and there. So yeah, I wouldn't put this down to the international break whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, to give Hertzler a bit of credit, his press conference was on the Thursday.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So he just didn't know. And then there's obviously no juncture at which he can tell anything to the press. I mean, they're hardly going to be kind of shouting from the rooftops, are they, on the Brighton official Twitter account? João Pedro is now injured because, yes, as you said,
I take back my criticism of Hertzler. I'm sorry.
It's all right. No, it definitely is one there. And the 0-0, I suppose, means he may be needed anyway going forward. So there you go. Right, on to the main topic today, which is the FPL game state. So just to introduce this a little bit, I think the hallmark of the first 3 weeks was people were quite happy. I think it's fair to say, with the challenge of the multiple different pathways, multiple different approaches you could take to FPL. Now, maybe it's just this sort of 2 week period where everyone knew that Ipswich and Liverpool principally had a pocket of 2 home games, which looks fairly alluring, albeit mostly the game week, the fixtures just gone, perhaps, for where Brighton were concerned. And things have converged a bit. And I think like a few historical gripes of FPL have crept in. Probably 2 key things. One is the perma-captaincy. So Haaland becoming perma-captain again. I think it's paid to the No Haaland Brigade at the start of the year, who obviously will be upset about the fact he's recorded 4.8, I think it is, XG, and he's scored 9 goals. But I mean, that's Haaland for you. We've made those arguments, and the wildcard 6 strategy is very, very popular. I think that's going to be kind of a very, very kind of high yield week for people wielding that wildcard. So I think again that's kind of corralled us into a certain positioning as we look to wildcard in game week 6. And as I mentioned, there's a lack of sort of star players on live FPL, which also kind of was eye-catching for both of us when we were discussing what we were going to talk about today. So obviously we know it's a short stint, and even Haaland won't be the majority captain next week because of the Arsenal game. But as we spoke, Sam and I spoke this weekend, we realised this might be a good time to discuss how the template becomes more and less relevant through a season, and think maybe how we as managers respond to it as things evolve. So the notion of game state in football is the idea that there's different periods of the game which bring with them different expectations, personnel, setups, which are planned for and responded to, reacted to accordingly. So a really, really basic example, a game is different at kickoff to 80 minutes in after subs have maybe been made, goals have been scored, and maybe even players have been lost to red cards or something like that. Tactical approaches alter, and the mentality of the team alters. And to relate that to FPL management, using this analogy, which may be tortured, maybe not, through the season, the game state of FPL alters too. Some game weeks is pretty much a week where you sit on your hands maybe and accept that templation is going to occur, and you hope that the differentials already in place come in for you. Whereas others, you look to go on the attack, right? So in wildcard 6, that's what we're kind of potentially hoping to do. weeks like this one just gone, you have to hope the differentials come through. Really extreme example here, but remember we kind of wondered why Nick had gone with Sanchez a couple of weeks ago. Nick got 15 points for Sanchez this week. So, I mean, okay, a goalkeeper making a penalty save and so on and so forth is probably a bit wild, but got 85 points, I think he got this week. And he also owned Watkins, for example. So he had other players in the mix for him. But yeah, there's definitely this idea that throughout the season, you have periods where the opportunities expand and also the opportunities contract. A bit meta, but I think it works as an analogy in terms of thinking about how a season can play out and the different sort of modes, be they defensive, be they offensive, that you as a manager have to shift into to respond to the game state in front of you. I mean, does that make sense? Does that make sense, Sam, or have I come up with something a little bit too meta for everybody?
No, not at all. I think a lot of people listening, and certainly I can relate to that. You see, especially at the start of the season when there's such a large engaged base of managers, crowd noise and herd mentality really takes hold very quickly. And we saw within a couple of game weeks the swing towards a Haaland and Salah kind of team, whereas at the start there was a pretty even balance between Haaland only, Salah only, and both as three different routes. Within a few game weeks, both of us have found ourselves on the double of Haaland and Salah, basically looking at captaincy mainly for game week 5. But also because both of them got off to record starts in the first 3 game weeks as well, 41 points each, I think it was, from the first 3. Obviously, Haaland has continued that in game week 4. Salah had a blank, but is still off to an absolutely phenomenal start. And because of their pricing, it's kind of restricted flexibility elsewhere. And okay, we've probably all got 1 or 2 players that you wouldn't quite call template, but most of our sides with the double or triple moves that have been made in the last couple of weeks to get to either a Salah or a Haaland and have them both in your side has meant that the second or third players coming in have to kind of fit into quite a narrow framework of players that actually fit into that structure. So you're looking at your 5.5 and under midfielders. Rodgers obviously stood out for quite a long time. I'm looking at the effective ownership right now. It's at 29.5% in the top 10K. You're also looking at Eze, who is my transfer in this week. He's at 32.7 top 10K ownership. And up front as well, João Pedro has been bought by a lot of managers as a make weight to free up some money so you can bring in more likely Salah at this point than Haaland, but one or the other. So yes, I think the template has gotten stronger all of a sudden from the first couple of game weeks. And we'll see that Constantina throughout the season. I think we mentioned before the season started how it fluctuates. And what we're probably about to see is game week 5, where quite a few of us will be taking 1 week punts ahead of a game week 6 wildcard. But also, interestingly, because we can roll transfers through the wildcard, it might mean that a lot of managers don't even take that chance and just leave it with their standard pretty template 11 for 1 more game week, hope that they can ride it out. And then a lot will depend on how template it looks in the game week 6 wildcard for the next phase of play. And that'll be the next 4 or 5 game weeks after game week 6, where a lot of managers have pressed the button. If we're all on a fairly similar team, it will take another 2 or 3 game weeks before that kind of starts to spread a little bit as edge pieces come into play and different managers have differing opinions on how brave to be or how quickly to stick or twist. And then it will come back together again by game week 10, 11 as well, when there's a fixture run and a good team has a good patch of fixtures and everyone wants the next hot thing. So it comes and goes. At the moment, I think we're in a short period of pretty heavy templateness in the first few game weeks, for lack of a better term. And then it'll probably move away from that again after the wildcard for a few weeks. But I think you just ride it out and you just make sure that you're happy with your side and you're not buying these players because other people are buying them. You're buying them because you genuinely think that they're good options.
Yeah, absolutely. Good use of Constantina, 1, and then 2, good use of phase of play effectively as well to extend the analogy even further. That's it, absolutely, and I think that's kind of I suppose a bit of evergreen sort of observation almost. That's kind of be what happens most years. Obviously, accepting the rolling up of transfers, which we will definitely come on to. I think the other thing that I just mentioned with regards to what specifics this season versus past ones is the pricing being quite good, which means that you spoke about edge pieces, for example. It may be that the main pieces too do differ. So, for example, we've been looking at a few sort of wildcard drafts, just kind of kicking them around, and there are worlds where I don't own Palmer, I don't own Watkins, for example. Whereas these are players that other people may be thinking, well, you know what, they're going to be part of my core team. I'm going to be building around them. So I do think that we will see differentiation, even if it does feel like, and if you're not in this kind of select band of people who are wildcard in game week 6, it may feel like, oh, you know what, it's going to be the attack of the clones a little bit. I'm going to be kind of assaulted by basically loads of people suddenly kind of pitching up with a very, very similar team. And it may be the case, actually, because obviously there's a lot of very influential voices in the community who are following the strategy. But nevertheless, I think there will still be differentiation in loads of different areas as a result of the pricing being very good and promoting variation, which may be specific more to this year, perhaps, than in previous years. And I think that's again a very healthy state for FPL to be in, rather than last year where you started with a very similar team, wildcards into a very similar team, just because the pricing on offer was so kind that basically let you just pick all the favourites that your heart desired, effectively. I suppose when you're in this situation, and I suppose we've only got one more week of this until kind of the great reckoning, when the wildcards do get wielded, there's obviously questions, and this will apply as the season rolls forward. So I think don't take it so much as being based upon this week, but just whenever this situation arises, whenever this game state arises, that you're looking at it and thinking, oh, you know what, my team, I think there's probably only going to be like a couple of players who are really making a difference for me this week. There's always that temptation, isn't there, Sam, to take an opportunity, to make a transfer when everyone else is rolling. I'm sure that there's kind of been loads of weeks that we can kind of dimly remember where the consensus was to roll, but there was maybe one player you could have swapped out for another one. And, we remember like the successes. So I was selling an Almiron for Matoma for me a couple of years back, for example, just before Matoma went on a tear. FPL Fran, friend of the pod last year, bought Sterling and Gusto versus Luton, I think game week 3 or Chelsea went on a ridiculous run, and they never reached those heights again. But I think Sterling got a brace and Gusto got a couple of assists, and those are going to be 30 points in the piggy bank that people are never going to be able to take away from you effectively, and that gives you like such a huge lead over others. And I suppose what I mean by this is, in this situation, when you are seeing that your team, you are anticipating your team's going to be quite template, and you're going to be anticipating that everything's going to hinge on the team as a collective doing well, and the fact is that you're not going to have too much kind of differential joy this week, unless you kind of obviously get favoured by variance, because there aren't that many differentials in your team. Do you bide your time, do you reckon, in that instance, Sam, or do you way towards kind of taking opportunity that seems a bit stale at the opportunity cost of later on having that benefit? So, for example, this week, Isak, if he is fit but he's dropping in price, and you don't really fancy him anymore for whatever reason, you could go to Vardy or something like that. What do you normally kind of weigh towards, and how good do you think that tends to be?
Yeah, so there's the version of me that I know I am as a person, and I am more conservative. I will tend to hold on to a player for slightly too long sometimes, thinking that, oh, don't worry, back the data, they'll come good. But without trying to call everyone to arms and trying to inspire everyone into action, I think that is maybe the incorrect move sometimes. I think that what makes or breaks a lot of people's seasons, and when we see people who have had an absolutely mega season, talking the top 1k, top 500, top few, if you're going to go on and win it, you're going to go on and get something really memorable. I would go as far as to say that this is the most important thing to get right in FPL. 2-3 times a season, if you can pick the right time to go against the template and you make that move, knowing that the risk could bite you in the arse as well, but you take it anyway and it pays off even a couple of times during a season, those could be the moments that make or break, because not only could it work out for 1 week, but it also could work out for a game week 6-7 period, at a 6 or 7 game week period rather, especially if you're not planning on wildcarding the next week like we are. And that could really set you up. You could get on a player before anyone else, cover off all the price rises there. You get all of the lovely points before anyone's got there in the first place, and everyone else is playing catch up. Like you said, Fran last season obviously got on a massive tear with Sterling and Gusto, but I'd care to wager that most seasons, the managers that know when to call those moments correctly are the ones that will end up in the top 1,000 come the end of the season. It's not about always taking risk. It's about knowing when to take risk and when you're willing to roll the dice against the prevailing wind. And if that can work out once or twice and you get those calls right, then that's when you have a mega season. So I think the art is knowing when to roll and when to, as in roll the dice, and when to just leave it. At the moment, I'm siding on leave it for this week as it stands, by the way, but a lot of managers might see it differently, and there might be an opportunity there that I'm just missing out on.
I guess on the other hand, a lot of people who don't have a stellar season but every year have very good seasons, their advice would always be, I'm thinking of, the Matthew Joneses, the FPL Salahs of the world, what they would advise every time would be just to leave it, kind of thing, because there's that chance that making that 1 week punt. So for example, this week, if you sold Isak for Vardy, and Vardy, as per my bold claim later on, spoilers, does bring back the Vardy party against Everton, hey, you know what, your quid's in, you've just absolutely beaten the template effectively. But again, I mentioned availability heuristic earlier on. We think these things are going to happen because you remember the one time it did happen. And most times, if you do kind of take the opportunity, there's obviously the kudos and the sense of sort of self-valorization that comes from that. But the reality is that a lot of the time that it doesn't actually pay off. And you find that the next week or the week after, you're kind of sat there thinking, oh, you know what, I could have done the second transfer. Or I could have done, or I should have left it because the player that I've removed, if it's an elective transfer rather than an enforced one, has done all right anyway, has matched my transfer out. So I suppose it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B once more, picking your battles, I suppose, is where you'd kind of look at it. In a situation like this week, so if Isak was out, there is a world where I have Vardy and or Calvert-Lewin on my wild card. In fact, probably it's got Calvert-Lewin in it at the moment, but either of them are probably are likely for that kind of third forward slot. So there is a world where I think, I accelerate that transfer, do it 1 week early. Leicester versus Everton, it feels like the game where lots is going to go on. So there is a world where I do that, go for it and see what happens, knowing that I'll be keeping the player going forward anyway. I think Everton, not that actually matters at the moment with 4 game weeks gone, the second worst defense in the league, which will come as no surprise to anybody. The first team ever to lose 2 games from a 2-goal winning position. Sorry guys. But yes, it is difficult, isn't it? And I think there's definitely kind of I know it's a bit of a cop out, but you've got to be a bit, take it on a case-by-case basis almost, with the different weeks and what the context is. So this time round, it is kind of very much with the idea that if you're on a wildcard 6, you might want to be looking at it a bit more critically and thinking, well, actually, the 2 free transfers, rolling them into my wildcard week and then having them after I've wildcarded to mop up any mistakes happen or start the snowball again. Because the idea of most wildcards, surely, if you are doing some planning, is going to be that I don't need to make transfers for quite a while. So why would I do anything this week? Even if, there's a little bit of a joy deficit, shall we say, in terms of how you're setting up for the week. But maybe you are kind of the person who, and I definitely have some empathy with this, who has a wildcard team in place, which is at 0.0. But if Isak drops, then you're going to lose that wildcard team if other things don't go your way. So maybe you would make the transfer, and I get behind that as well. It's just the I guess the lived experience Sam does tend to tell me, and if you are a long-term listener to this pod, you will know that I have pretty much on every opportunity up until the last few years taken the cookie and found myself getting food poisoning. So,
From a cookie.
well, I've always, I think that whenever the A or B has been granted to me, A being take the transfer, B roll, I've always taken the transfer, always hit rather than stuck. And I just don't think it's ever paid off for me. While I've watched the likes of FPL General, for example, stick and enjoy the proceeds thereof. I mean, even last year, we can think of things like selling Saka versus Bournemouth or selling Watkins again versus Bournemouth,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on a really good point there as well. In previous seasons, these 1 week punts have very little risk attached to it. You can just sort of roll with it. It's fine because there's no real opportunity cost to it. This season, because you can roll through the wild card, it's very different. Yeah, there is a mathematical equation you need to put into this. Do you actually think that the value of that extra free transfer on the other side of your wild card is going to be more effective than the upside from this 1 week punt over whichever player you're selling? And honestly, I think with Isak being the main topic of conversation right now, if he's fit, I don't think there are many players out there that I would honestly say is worth the opportunity cost. I do agree that that Leicester-Everton game is probably the game I'd take the punt on because both Vardy and DCL look very effective at the moment. So could see that working, but I could equally see Isak popping up with a brace against pretty much any Premier League opponent. So yeah, I think there is risk there. I do want to be more of a daring manager at very select moments this season because, as I mentioned, I never really went on the attack last year. So I need to be much more careful to trust my gut at the moments that my gut is telling me something. This week, it's not really even whispering. So I don't really think that this is the week that I want to do that right now, obviously barring injuries. But there is an element of bravery that is required if you want that mega rank, I think, to get ahead of the template. It's just whether or not you think now is the right time for it. I personally don't.
I suppose that this year as well, the value of the role transfer being elevated perhaps means we're more cautious when we're in a game state like we're in right now. And I think that that's something that's going to pervade over the course of the season. So, the next time we're all in kind of the situation that we're all, but you know what I mean, where a lot of people are in the same situation as you are, where you've got the opportunity to potentially move out a faltering player, but the fixture is okay. I mean, it's not quite the right time, and you feel like you're forcing it to make a move a week early, or a player that you bring in will be kind of quite clearly a bit of a 1 week punt sort of scenario, rather than given the energy of a player you're making long-term investment in. I feel that this year, more because of the changes in the game, and to add to that sort of evergreen advice, this year I think you're going to be a lot more inclined just to be cautious about it, and as you say, be a lot more calculated about when you're going to be making those those aggressive maneuvers. I mean, the wild card is obviously one thing because that's part and parcel of it. You're very rarely going to be wildcarding from a position of consolidation. You're almost always going to be wildcarding from a position of needing to attack in some way, shape, or form. Even if you're kind of OR1, I think that's probably the only time you could ever be wildcarding with consolidation, surely. Overall, with this, do you think we get any sort of warning that a template is forming, or does it just kind of happen suddenly? Is there anything in the ether out there in the zeitgeist which gives us an indication that, oh, hang on, we might be heading for a couple of weeks at least where everybody's going to have a very similar team, and maybe is kind of we're in that sort of do we bide our time or take opportunities sort of a question?
I think what we've seen in the last 2 weeks is a good example where the captaincy seems pretty well mapped out for a lot of managers, especially game week 4 and 5. It seemed pretty obvious where the captaincy was going. But also, interestingly, it wasn't just one captain between those 2 weeks. There was a very clear favourite in 1 week and a very clear second favourite in the following week. And those two players also happened to both be the heavy hitters, meaning that the moves were going to be pre-orchestrated to make sure that most of our teams had both of them in a lot of cases. Obviously, there are always exceptions, but having Haaland and Salah in situ has meant that there's a lot less flexibility elsewhere, and certain other moves needed to be mapped out in advance. Those moves being for the cheaper players, of which we're obviously dealing with a much more select palette of players. There's not so many choices down the bottom end in terms of players that we can trust. And when content creation is as popular as it is, and obviously Twitter will boost the most popular post, as we've already talked about this year, it does lead you down a bit of a path and gives you, again, we're talking about the availability heuristic you mentioned at the start. If you're seeing a lot more of talk about a Rodgers at the start of the week, you're probably going to narrow it down to one or two picks, him being one of them, and you're much more likely to end up on him than maybe other players that haven't been mentioned at all that week. So I think that's what's happened these past weeks, but it's also definitely something to look out for in the future, where captaincy seems really obvious. Maybe there's a really obvious set of really nice fixtures for a number of good teams. So maybe Arsenal and Liverpool both at the same time stumble into a good patch of green fixtures, and you want a Saka with a Salah. That's great, but it also probably means that a lot of your budget has been spent, and therefore you've got less flexibility elsewhere. And it also immediately means you're much less likely to have Haaland. So again, you're starting to look at a much more mapped out 11 just from two teams having a good set of fixtures, or two captaincy choices being kind of locked into your side for a few game weeks at a time. So that's where I'd probably be looking out for the warning signals for templates forming ahead of time.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I think it's something that we'll hopefully refer back to in terms of this pod. But I think overall, kind of game states in the season is obviously something which is quite. It's one of those things that I think goes unmentioned, but I think it was just worth us flagging this week, because there are times when it feels like you've got an open run, an open field when it comes to contesting a certain big player, or a kind of a very sort of a la mode player has run out of steam, and suddenly you've got that opportunity to swap him over. And hopefully, if you get there a week before everyone does on the next sort of train, and then those points at least are going to be yours for at least 1 week. The margins of you having those unique points is very, very small this year, and has been very small for quite a while. But yeah, I think game states is definitely something that's really interesting going forward, just because we're able to, I suppose, frame how we look at kind of I guess not just 1 game week, but a few game weeks of the season, and hopefully sort of home in on the stance we're going to be taking for those, whether it is defensive or offensive, or if there's any sort of opportunity we could possibly be looking at. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of rounds it off nicely. I think, Sam, is there anything else you want to bring up?
No, all good. I think that's very well summarized, Tom.
Lovely. All right. So the price point this week, we still need to find a better name for this. I was thinking like the watchword was one that came to mind for me, or just being really, really vanilla and just calling it the eye test. But I feel like that's a little bit
Old
too
hat.
bit too basic for me. I don't like it. It's kind of you'd even call it, I don't know, just what I saw this week.
There's got to be a football manager twist that we're not thinking of here. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'll ask my assistant and see what they think going forward. I mean, anything for you this week?
No, nothing in particular. I thought I'd hand it over to you, but as you mentioned before, you've watched a bit more football than me this weekend. I had a very busy one. So, yeah, I think you had at least one very good point I'm very interested to hear.
Yeah, okay. So it was more it is an interesting one. So Semenyo, I was scouting him against Chelsea this weekend. He's looking like he's gonna be wildcard inclusion for me. I think there's a fair bit of what I'll call a fringe buzz about him, the kind of player people mention as kind of and him too, rather than him being front and center of discussion or possibles, and a slightly unfashionable player. But as I said, definitely in the fringe for my game week 6 wildcard. Decent underlying data over the first 3, decent reports from journalists, people watching, Bournemouth fans saying he's looking to shoot and so on and so forth. So I thought, you know what, I've got quite a Saturday evening, baby's in bed, missus is out. So I watched the game with no FPL assets actually in them, what always cheating we call the pure watch, to do a bit of scouting. I was also scouting another player who we'll discuss more next week, Nicholas Jackson. Might be more popular now. Wissa has been ruled out for 2 months. So maybe he'll be a player in that sort of 6.8, but that sort of category. But more a next week discussion, I think, Jackson, so we'll park him for now. But back to Semenyo, as I watched, I thought, I mean, I'm no S-grade tactical genius, but I could tell that it soon became pretty clear that he had specific tactical instructions on the day, which were mainly to nullify Chelsea's reliance on Cucurella, who inverts. And that was wrought out in the underlying data from the game too. So he was averaging 0.77 XGI per game before this one. In this one, just 0.13. And he did that. Basically, just followed him around, trailed him, covered his runs until, and it's that word again, the game state changed, which was when Evan Nilsson, who missed penalty, went off. He went centre forward as Bournemouth chased the game. I thought they were unlucky to lose. So it was like what was a fairly even game from where I was sat. And obviously, I saw Evan Nilsson missed the penalty that Sanchez saved to give Nick Harris a lot of very, very excitement for him. But yeah, I thought to myself after watching that, hey, you know what? Right, the player I'm here to scout hasn't actually done anything which has commended him to me. So I thought, what can I learn from this? Because I know that there's some tactical instruction that he's been given. Basically, that's affected how he's performed in the game. There's no doubt about that, I don't think, unless I've completely misread it and he was just massively defensive all game and he decided himself to be that guy. But on reflection, I felt like it was a good reminder of how the eye test has something in common with analytics. Going back to our preseason tete-a-tete with Simon, it's the importance of context, I suppose. So if I was watching that game in isolation and scouting Semenyo, I'd have thought he was potentially, a defensive winger and quite a reserved player. He's just there as a bit of an attack dog, a Jordan Ayew, effectively, and I'd be put off completely. But I'm not, because I can intuit what was going on, probably, and place this game in context versus the others that I've seen highlights of, where he does look a lot more sort of attractive as an FPL asset, and heard about in terms of those watching the games relaying back the information they've seen, where he's a lot more direct and a lot more sort of interesting to us as managers. So I guess that's a lesson, that sometimes context is important when watching games and watching certain players. You can't judge everything on one instance, and sometimes you have to apply your brain to interpret what you see and what's valid, which isn't in your evaluation of the player. So overall, I'm still interested in Semenyo, given the fixtures coming up. Saints and Leicester in 6 and 7 are good, but there's tough fixtures after that, so a bit of rotation will be required, I think, now. Whereas before, I was thinking, I'll just leave him in for those games, because I've got a greater awareness now that Iriola trusts him to do that kind of job. So there may be some games where I'm happy to bench him because this may happen again. So I think it's Arsenal, Villa, and Man City that he's got between 8 and 10. And in those, he may well be he may well be asked to play a specific tactical role. So it feels an easy decision to bench him too within that. But in the context of his fun zone price, that's fine. I'm happy. But yeah, it's one of those where it kind of underlined to me, I guess, how the eye test always needs to be contextualized, and it's never a case of this player has done a goal, therefore he is going in my team. This player has done a few shots, and therefore he is going in my team. There's always got to be something more that you've got to add to that in order to give yourself value from the eye test. That's my bit, basically.
Really well summarized. I think you're looking at job postings for analytics as we speak, right, Tom? So yeah, that's very well summarized.
No, that's just my
very good,
my thoughts on it. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe I've got that completely wrong, and I'm very happy to be corrected that maybe Semenyo always plays like that.
No, I back you completely on that, and that's something for me to think about, because Semenyo was creeping into my wildcard thinking quite heavily, especially with those 2 fixtures coming up you mentioned. So yeah, something to definitely keep a watchful eye on, not just with Semenyo, but also with other players in slightly maybe less fashionable teams that might be given a job to do against the stronger opponents rather than let them be their creative selves. So yeah, very well summarized, Tom. And yeah, look forward to more of your analysis over the next few weeks.
Yeah, this is it now. I'm done for a while. It's all on you after this. Seriously. Okay. Cool. So into the game week 5 preview, the week ahead. As usual, the knee jerk, the best transfers, the bold claims, and the best captains. Now, knee jerk this week, I think, probably is going to be affected a little bit by the game state chat we just had. Do you jump this week or do you hold out if you're looking to wildcard in 6? Or if you're not, if you use your wildcard already, or you're kind of looking to maybe play it later, you're not entirely sure, then the cover man, if you're watching on YouTube, is Isak. Just to let you know if you're listening. So, do you jump off a play like that this week, or do you hold out? Isak's got Fulham, and he goes into Man City in game week 6. So you might be thinking, well, there's a mixture of the fact that Newcastle have had a different start in terms of the performances, the best start in X years, I think, actually, in terms of points on the board. Isak himself has certainly underwhelmed. We're all expecting great things, but I think there's important context there that Southampton, there's a red card very early on. Bournemouth, yeah, I mean, it wasn't the best performance, but you know what they're like away, I suppose. And then redeemed himself somewhat against Spurs, as James Blunt FPL would say. Tottenham will see you now, and then against Wolves got taken off at half time. But it's one of those where I think that he I think is probably the biggest knee jerk this week, and maybe there'll be some who maybe think they've been sold a pup in terms of Rodgers, for example, but that's not really appearing as far as I can see in the net sales out this week. Others like maybe Eze as well could be one that people might be looking at and thinking, oh, you know what, that was the big game against Leicester. I brought him in before. I'm going to get rid of him now. Anyone else maybe that could fit in as a knee jerk?
I mean, if people are being really knee-jerky, they might look at getting rid of Saka or João Pedro after, obviously, Saka went off with an injury again, and João Pedro missed out. I feel like that would be very knee-jerky. I'd be extremely surprised if Saka didn't play against Man City. Although it is worth noting that it is Man City, and if you're looking at a one game week switch before a wild card, a lot of managers might be looking at getting rid of him anyway, so that might make sense. And then João Pedro, it just depends how severe the injury is. You'd hope that he comes back in, and therefore you don't need to jerk that knee. But I think Isak is probably going to be the most popular one. Obviously, Eze, as you mentioned, possibly off of penalties, or at least
Costa as well, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. Well, maybe you could enlighten us as to whether your knee is jerking a little bit on Jota. I probably wouldn't just yet, but it's certainly a concern.
No, definitely isn't. I think it's because it's because it's the context of us. Well, I'm going to say us now. Wildcarding next week does mean that I'm just not keen to be moving anyone on unless there's a serious problem. This week I've got 2 decent-ish subs as well, and I feel like that kind of transfer is going to be it's butterfly effects, isn't it? But I feel like that transfer is going to be so much more useful going forward that it doesn't feel like it. I mean, if Isak is ruled out this week, then I think that definitely makes it a little bit tougher. Or João Pedro's ruled out, it does make it a little bit tougher because I think most people have probably got someone off the bench they're not going to be too confident in. So, for example, I've got Munoz away at home against Man United, which it might be all right.
I'd be fine with that.
So, yeah, I mean, it might be that, but I think that game they'll concede a fair bit. So it's going to come down to can he return in attacking, or would it be worth kind of the opportunity cost of those free transfers going forwards? Because then it kind of becomes an article of faith in my wildcard team. Do I think that I can just keep this for quite a while? And I'm hoping that I can. And so, yeah, my knee hasn't jerked. I'm not particularly interested in making a transfer this week. But if I do really have to do it, I think that it's just always worth having a plan B, isn't it? Which would probably be to do Isak to Vardy and think, I'm probably going to keep Vardy anyway. So fine, I'll just leave it there, leave it be. Yeah, I mean, anything for you?
No, I mean, just one note on Munoz. I didn't do an eye test this week, but one thing I did notice from watching the Saints game, we had a lot of joy down that right-hand side in the first half. So if we can, Munoz definitely can for Palace. So yeah, I wouldn't hate that at all. He might get quite a bit of joy up against United's left-hand side. So yeah, don't fear too much, Tom. But no, I think in terms of knee-jerk, Isak is the one that it would probably look like being for me too. He'll obviously be the popular knee jerk in the community. I am definitely going to wait and hope that he plays. Fulham is a good game as far as I'm concerned. And this is a player that over a couple of seasons now, we've seen the data, we've seen how potent he can be. I'm not going to get rid of him if he's fit to start. I'm pretty set on that. I've got just enough on my bench that I can maybe carry a risk into the game week as well. I've got Hall, who luckily started in game week 4. So hopefully he starts this week. And then Armstrong, yeah, I mean, we'll go into that later, but not looking great.
No, sadly not. It is what it is with Isak. I think he's a player that we all had high hopes at the start of the year. It feels more that events have conspired because of those events rather than because of him, that it's not quite worked out.
I'd
sort
agree.
of thing. He's still just outside the top 20 for non-pen XGI this year, for example.
Yeah, he's got 2 returns
for XG this year. So it's just inside top 30. He's got the same non-pen XGI as Danny Welbeck, for just as a kind of a bit of a raw example of how things can really diverge. So it just kind of shows that he is a quality player. We all know that. It's just not quite worked out thus far. I mean, because of fixtures, I'm hoping we have a final flourish, a final goodbye versus Fulham, which is a fruitful one. But I think after that, it might be a case of just going elsewhere, because I think the money's going to be needed elsewhere in your team, and that's that really.
Yeah.
Best transfers this week, just to give an idea of what's going on. It does feel like one of those weeks where people are keeping their powder dry, honestly, because in the past few weeks, we've been kind of saying, 700, 800,000 have been moving X to Y. The top player brought in is, again, Erling Haaland. Lots of people have decided they've seen enough, frankly. Okay.
One less goal, though. He's out of form.
Exactly. It needs to be sold immediately. Up to the sweet 69% transfers percent ownership now. So one of those that I think is just going to. He's there now, really, as the captain, for a long time this season, which I'm perfectly okay with. I don't really care that the captaincy is taken out of the equation, honestly. Because it just makes everything. It's one less decision to make effectively every week, and it forces the emphasis on the rest of the team. Luis Diaz, again, being brought in by a lot of people. I think that's just because he's scored a lot of points thus far this year. Ollie Watkins brought in by 150,000, which makes a lot more sense. He was pre-season very high on my list of desires for around now. I think I won't be getting him in at any point soon. Jamie Vardy is just below him, turns 38 in January, I believe.
Wow.
But, still, the man's a freak of nature, honestly. It's insane how he's doing what he's doing.
He will be studied by science at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe slightly less pacey, but he's got all that experience now, which kind of, I guess, makes up for it in terms of just the know-how. Effectively, he's one of those that we've spoken about him a lot on this podcast in years past. Smith Rowe and been brought in as well a little bit, but I mean those numbers are all kind of 100,000-ish mark, which is really low compared to what we've seen over the last few weeks. So Isak and João Pedro unsurprisingly been sold, I guess, to make room for Vardy, Watkins, Haaland. Gvardiol didn't start, so still being sold. And then you've got Eze and Saka, who are being sold as well. Kind of understand Saka, especially if you're looking to maybe wildcard him back in. Eze less so, because it's not as if United and Everton are standard bearers for defensive solidity, really, in total. Of all of those, in terms of the top 5 either side, I don't mind Vardy, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't mind Calvert-Lewin, who is just outside the top. It makes me laugh when you see kind of 82,000 managers have bought in Robert Sanchez. He's not a 1980s DJ. Robert Sanchez. I mean, it's just one of those things, isn't it, where you'll always see this sort of nonsense occur. But I mean, I don't mind Vardy of all those, but the rest of them, it kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just me coming at it from a perspective of thinking I'm going to re-roll in this. But I'm kind of quite heartened by the fact there's less activity this week than otherwise we'd be seeing.
Yeah, agreed. I think if I was push to make transfers this week. The forwards are looking like the most tempting. Vardy, DCL, Watkins, all definitely on the list and enticing at the moment. Obviously, even Mateta maybe comes into that conversation as well a little bit. But yeah, none of them have really put their hand up enough that I'm desperate to rip my team apart to get to them. And I think that's reflected also in the general zeitgeist and the general feeling in FPL at the moment. And obviously the net transfers in are pretty low as well. So yeah, I think it is on average going to look like quite a quiet week. There will be managers making moves, but not as many as maybe we've seen so far this season.
Yeah, very happy to see Smith Rowe give us a profit of 0.1. That's very good on his last week. I do love the man, honestly, but I feel like that there's just probably slightly better options as they come
Time's running
into
out.
a tougher period. Of Nottingham Forest in game week 6, they are the third best defence this season, actually.
And they were good last year on the data too.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So it's Ola Aina is 4.4 preferred over Neco Williams on the other side to Marino. I suspect after a clean sheet against Liverpool that will stick. So he's of decent interest. And so game week 7 for Smith Rowe's Man City. I really warmly suggest that everyone sells Saka. Just get rid of him immediately. Like right now, like if you listen to this, just go to your app, sell him right now, just so we can get him back for 9.9 on the wildcard.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah,
it's never going to happen. They're never going to let him drop to 9.9. I don't think, Sam.
No, he could be down at 1% ownership. He'll still be 10. It's just never happening.
Yeah. But I love the man. And Angel in the chat said Saka cramps. There's nothing unusual there.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
That's just. I mean, I think he might miss Atlanta.
It could happen.
Yeah, Jesus.
They've got
Sterling
enough, haven't they, to cover.
Yeah, Martin.
And Atlanta, I don't think have been that great in the last few months either. I think they've had a bit of a drop off in the new season from watching a couple of like European based shows. So maybe they're not going to be so fearsome this year.
Yeah, but we can do it about him. So he misses that game, but if he's got one leg, he starts versus City, doesn't he? Let's face it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So a bit of a quiet time in the transfer market, which is always good, especially if you're looking to wildcards straight away. Maybe some people are holding on to their transfers just because there's a wildcard coming, or just because there's the midweek games. But classically, we don't really see people thinking ahead early season, so I think it probably just tantamounts to the fact that there's not too far to go this week. Bold claims though, Sam. 1-0 to Price.
Whoa, I've actually got on the board. Although I remember last season, I think I went ahead quite early and you caught me up very quickly and overtook. So I'm not getting ahead of myself. But my bold claim did come in. So I went with the 3 popular transfers in to be beaten by the 3 most popular transfers out, which was a combination of Saka, Isak and Bruno combining to outscore the likes of Salah, Eze and Pedro. That happened quite comfortably. I think it was 13-4. Would I be correct in saying that? So yeah, perfect. So yeah, that actually worked out very nicely, although not for me because I sold 2 and bought the other 2. So yeah, not fantastic, but I hedged my bets and I got on the board with a bold claim. So that's fine by me.
Fair enough. I had Isak top scorer in the game week, which obviously did not happen to many people's chagrin. Well, I mean, it is what it is. I think that's the sort of bold claim we like to see come through. Although it's one of those where you kind of mitigating against betting against yourself, aren't you, effectively? But it just gives you a bit of
hedging.
Exactly. Happiness hedging. I like that. What about this week?
This week, I'm going for an unfortunate repeat of the infamous Salah Bournemouth clash from years gone by. I think it was 7-0 with no Salah involvement. 9-0, sorry. Of course, 9-0. How could I forget? With no Salah involvement. And considering he'll be a very popular captaincy pick and transfer and all of that this week, I'm going with a Salah blank versus Bournemouth again, just to, happiness hedge slightly. I can see it happening, though. It's happened before. It could happen again.
Yeah, didn't play very well, did he?
No.
So maybe he's not the same as AFCON, honestly. Mainly because he's cut his Mel B haircut off. Okay, I've gone for Vardy to bring the party back versus Everton and score a double-digit haul. I think that's absolutely fine.
Lovely.
if
I
there's a
can see
problem
it.
with Isak, I may be buying him in anyway. But yeah, it is what it is. And we've already sort of discussed this, but well, touched upon it. But best captains this week, I suppose it has to be the man, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Mo, very popular this week. Bournemouth at home. Obviously, bold claim, I'm going against it, but it's bold for a reason. And that reason is Salah is going to be the most likely player to score big this week. Bournemouth are not a bad side, by the way, by any means. But in terms of the big hitters this week, especially the ones that are owned by a lot of managers, like we've mentioned throughout the pod, the template has sort of formed. It is mainly now Haaland with Salah. And even if you had a Saka, you're very unlikely to want to go there against Man City. That kind of leaves Salah as the most popular pick. There will be edge pieces. You could go differential, of course, and it could work out very nicely. But to bet against Salah with a decent looking home fixture when his greatest two rivals week in, week out for captaincy are up against each other, both with good defenses, it might be a week to have a go with it. Obviously, Haaland is never a bad pick, ever. But if there was ever a week not to captain him, it would be against a side that are by far the best defence in the league statistically, who have kept 3 clean sheets in 4 already this season as well. So, yeah, Salah will be the most popular pick this week, no question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned last week that maybe if you didn't go Salah, that this would be the week you go for a Trent, or
Yeah.
if you own Luis Diaz, probably that'd be where you go, depending on obviously midweek.
Yeah, that's the problem.
It's a bit of a gnarly week, isn't it? If you're kind of pick out a differential captain, I suppose it would be Watkins versus Wolves, wouldn't it? I mean, that's the only other place you probably want to go.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Son at home to Brentford if you had him, or
Yeah.
anywhere near. I know Review early season was recommending me a route towards him for this week, so don't hate it, but I honestly don't love it either.
No.
So yeah, I think for me, I mean, there will be a few managers out there with Palmer away at West Ham, but West Ham have looked decent as well. Watkins, yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Would be probably the standout option outside of the general norm at the moment.
Yep, captaincy section, which reflects the game state again.
It does.
It's fairly cut and dried this week. If you don't own Salah, then I think it's got to be Watkins. Because I assume if you don't own Salah, you probably would have invested in Watkins. Honestly, other than that, I struggle really. Apart from if you're going really Hail Mary or you're trying to Riker it with a Trent. That's the only thing I can feasibly see anyone doing. If you're there kind of captaining Liam Delap versus Southampton, then fair play to you.
Could work.
Vardy versus Leicester.
Leaf Davis.
Everton.
Yeah, clean sheet, bonus points, assist or 2. Could work.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll see somebody with a ridiculous captain out of nowhere, so Vardy versus Everton, or Mavadidi versus Everton, something like that. But yeah, there's almost no point in going to anywhere in that section really. I feel really sorry for those who churn out captaincy articles every week when it comes to this week.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you reckon Haaland's EO is going to be?
I would still say depends what rank. If we're saying top 10k or maybe top million, actually would be a fairer reflection. I'd say probably 105% EO. There'll still be a few people out there who are just like home fixture captain him regardless, no matter what, because he has been that good. But I think enough managers own both of them now that it will swing much more towards Salah. This week, for example, I think we saw, I'm almost exactly 1 million. So I've got a good reflection of it. And it was 150% EO for Haaland and 95% EO for Salah. I think that swaps this week and possibly even slightly more for Haaland than Salah would have been last week.
Fair. No, Salah was I think he was a spy in my team on live FPL. So yeah, no, I think you're probably about right there. No, I think that going forward, I think it would just be a case of Haaland do Brades really, unless you really are kind of fancying a move out like a Gameweek 6, for example. I'm not worried about Newcastle away being any great shakes, especially seeing Dan Burn's performance. But how he starts Dan Burn for Newcastle was a mystery to me.
Height. That's it.
He's got to have some compromat. honestly. Hey, there we go. And then our team's game week 5 to round off the pod. I'm
Yeah,
up first.
you're
I
first.
think. Yep. Okay. So yeah, very straightforward. Not making any transfers. I don't think I've got 2 flags. Isak and João Pedro. Isak's got the vice captaincy at the moment, but he and João Pedro are flagged. But I think both of them are probably going to be okay to start this week. I've got Munoz and Irogbenam, if needs be, on the bench, who's away against Leicester. So if he comes on, whatever. I don't know. I don't really see any, without going from my team, at any point in making a transfer this week. I mean, maybe if I did get some intel that, say, 3 of my players were huge doubts, then maybe I'd be considering making a transfer. That would be the only threshold, I think, when I consider doing it. So the second free transfer is going to be so important. I don't have high hopes for this week, honestly. I think a lot of things have to go my way. I think a lot of it's going to ride on Salah's on Salah doing Salah things, and then Rodgers hopefully coming through. But yeah, I think the only differential I'm actually going to be fielding is probably going to be Conser. So yeah, a Conser 15-pointer would be very nice, please. So Esri, if you can sort it out, that would be lovely. But other than that, I think the whole of my team is going to be above 30-40% EO or whatever it is. So I'm just going to bide my time and just going to roll through this week.
It looks strong.
The most exciting thing, Sam, is going to be that when things reopen, I'm going to hit wildcard straight away. That's kind of what I'm looking forward to now, rather than the game week ahead. I think that reflects in kind of the week that we've got in front of us for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun to press that button. Although it must be said, your team is looking pretty strong for this week. Lots of home fixtures in there. Even if you did have one flag that ended up being a major doubt, Munoz first on the bench isn't bad either. So yeah, I'd be pretty confident if I was you. Onto my side, I'm also hoping to roll my transfer. How I have managed to hold on to this bench all the way through to wildcard in game week 6 is a miracle. Obviously, non-starting keeper, Armstrong's lost his place, Hall lost his place, and is now back in the starting 11, which is very helpful and a very good bit of timing in case Isak is a doubt. And Barco is still off in Seville somewhere. So I'm just about surviving one last week. Minte, I've just got this sneaky suspicion he's going to get benched sometime soon. I'm just hoping it's not game week 5. And obviously Nottingham Forest is a good defence anyway, so not feeling particularly amazing about that, but maybe he'll come good. Overall, again, lots of home fixtures. I've got the most important factor, which is the captaincy sorted, and having Trent in my back line as well feels like quite a nice player to make sure I have this week, that whilst his ownership is not low, it's also still a pretty decent marginal benefit, and I'm hoping at some point there is a mega haul in it for him. Overall, I'm not too bothered about any moves unless Isak is definitely out, and even then I could probably just bring in Hall and I'd make peace with it, though not ideal, and though I may still be risking a start there. I think the extra free transfer out of the wild card, especially when I'd obviously be looking at rolling for a couple of weeks, probably puts me in a really strong position by around game week 8 or 9. And I think that will be more worthwhile than taking a 1-week punt as it stands. But yeah, it's not the best looking side I've ever seen ahead of game week 5, but it's not the worst. And I'll probably take that for now.
Yeah, I think my wild card's basically just got me making no transfers for an awfully long time. At least the draft I've got. So
yeah,
if I do have made transfers this week, I'm not going to be crying over spilt milk. I'll just do it and then kind of figure out accordingly. If, as I said, if Isak's out, then I'll probably grab Vardy. João Pedro's injury niggle means that he's still out, and again, I'll probably grab Vardy.
Yeah,
it's one of those things where I'm okay with it, and I'm just going to bide my time and just hope, if I get kind of 60, 65 this week, that's dreamland, effectively. And a lot of it will swing on Salah.
Sorry, what I've just had a thought. One week punt for you, if you're interested. If Isak's out, either of us could get Solanke.
Yeah.
That's it. Now that could be interesting.
It could be interesting. Yeah, I think he'll definitely score a lot of goals, won't he? I think that
Eventually, yeah.
it's just not quite working for him right now, but I seem to think of that one moment where he seemed to have bags of time, but spent a long time thinking about it and then got robbed of possession.
Yeah. But that's in a game with very limited chances against Arsenal as well, isn't it? Obviously, they're not going to expect a load of service in that game. And he's only played 2 matches for them so far. I quite like it. I mean, I probably won't at this point in time, but if you are looking for a 1-week punt and Isak is out, I would probably recommend Solanke.
Yeah, I wouldn't say no to that. I think Fulham have actually got the equal 4th best defence with Arsenal this year.
Wow,
whatever that's
that is
worth,
a surprise.
In 4 games. So that's but I mean,
they have had good fixtures.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a symptom of that, which just shows what happens if you are sat there looking at the data around now and using that to make decisions. And most of it is kind of bottable, effectively. Cool. All right. I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, we've made it. That's a slightly shorter pod than usual, but I think that is summarized by the fact not that many transfers are being made at the moment as well, and it has been a bit slow coming back from the international break. Either way, though, we hope you've enjoyed listening and got some value from the show. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL or myself at FPL Pricey, and on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL. Again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. If you did enjoy the pod, we'd really appreciate it if you could do one or all of the following. That does include following us on the social channels, but also giving the pod a 5-star rating on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening, basically. And of course, if you're watching along on YouTube, do remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content.
Yep. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks so much for coming on, Sam, as always. Hope you enjoyed the pod. Hope you think more about how seasons enter different game states in FPL. We will refer to this a lot during the course of the season. The ideal week to talk about this, just because there's lots of other things which will go on as the season progresses. We'll speak to you next week.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?